All right, on today's episode of the Weesports Chronicles, I am joined by Peter Mendelsohn. He is a freelance sports journalist with bylines in The Athletic, Sportsnet, CBC Sports, among many others. Peter, welcome to the podcast, man. How are you?
I'm good. Lucas, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm excited.
Well, it's my pleasure, and you're the third guest of mine that has attended Centennial College's graduate sports journalism program. So I'm always happy to speak with people that have gone through the program. As someone is speaking to you, I'm currently in the program, so it's always nice to have the alum coming back and sharing their experiences.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very cool to be speaking with you, and it's always a pleasure talking to someone else with similar teachers, probably some funny stories we can share. So awesome to be here.
Do you have a funny Malcolm Kelly story right off the top?
I'll say I don't know if I should say this one, but I hope he doesn't mind. But there was we were on the bus to Florida, and we were we'd been on the bus for about 23 hours. I think we were about half hour away at this point, and we're in a rest stop, and I go to use the bathroom, and I see Malcolm, who's basically clean shaven, but he's shaving. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why he's shaving. We're half hour away from the hotel, and there's no shaving cream on his face, just kind of using a razor, and it's Malcolm. You love him, so I don't say anything, and we leave the bathroom around the same time. And I see like a trace of blood kind of coming down. I don't remember if it was his neck or his cheek. And, I had to say something, right? It wouldn't be fair to him just to walk to the rest of the class, full of blood on his face and neck. So I told him he needed to go back to the bathroom. But, it's, if that's a bizarre story, but if you know Malcolm, it won't surprise you at all. But yeah, definitely.
No, it won't. No, it won't. I'll say this story before we get into your career. We were in Florida as well, and unlike you, we took an airplane to Tampa, which of course a little bit quicker. And I'll say my condolences for you and those who had to have to travel that bus ride, because boy, I don't think I would have gone to Florida with the whole bus. But anyway, we get to Florida in our hotel. And just randomly, he does this shadow ball, just like that. And for those of you listening, he's pitching, shadow pitching. And then there's these two Floridian women who come in, and they're like, who is this guy? And I would probably be the same way, Peter. If I just walked into the hotel. Been a long flight. It's been, I've been traveling a long ways and just seen that, but it was, and then he went into this whole discussion about the meaning and impact of shadow balls. So it was very Malcolm-esque and very enjoyable, and it definitely laid the groundwork for a successful trip nonetheless. And of course, for those of you listening, Malcolm Kelly is the program coordinator and founder of Centennial College's graduate sports journalism program, which Peter graduated and I will be soon. In the stories that you've done, like you mentioned, let's say for The Athletic, Shane Corson in his battle with mental health, Keon Clark's journey to sobriety, they definitely had a lot of trust in you in order to reveal to reveal a lot of personal stories about themselves. And I think for journalists that have those different world experiences, for you it's law, for others it may be learning about economics, politics. I recently had Stephen Brunn on the show for the 50th episode of the Weesports Chronicles, and before he went into sports, he was the arts intern at the Globe, and he also covered news. And I feel like having that knowledge just makes you a more well-rounded sports journalist, where sometimes these real-world social issues integrate and intersect with what's happening in sports.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think the more diverse your backgrounds, the more helpful it'll be to any one field. And yeah, I was lucky that Shane Corson certain athletes have been willing to open up to me. I mean, I think, I can give myself some credit, but at the same time, obviously Shane, he still didn't know me, but he was willing to really open up. And I think, on his end, he really wants to, to help reduce the stigma towards mental health, help at least one person that's suffering. So, him having that desire, that made him more willing to open up to me. But I guess my advice to young journalists is, the other students at Centennial were great, but sometimes when we were conducting interviews, certain people, I'd see a basic interview and I was kind of, my rationale is you really have to prepare for the interview, right? Like read every Google News story there is on a subject I'm interviewing, just because I think the combination of just hopefully being nice during the interview and obviously being extremely well prepared, them realizing that, I really know what I'm talking about. I'm well researched on the subject. After some time, if we have a good rapport and they see that I know what I'm talking about, it's easier to ask more difficult questions, and a better chance that they'll be willing to open up. So, I think preparation for the interview is everything. And you have to ask good questions and tough questions. And, obviously, like a feature story, if I have a couple of weeks to write it, I have more time to prepare for the interview. If you have to file within a few hours, you can't necessarily read every story there is on a subject. But I'm kind of rambling. I'm not sure what point I'm making, but yes.
You're sounding like
I'll just say yes, whatever that. Yes, the answer is yes.
The answer is always yes. You're sounding like our Centennial Prof Shai Davidi from Rogers Sportsnet, because I don't know if you had Shai, but we had Shai this year, and he of course taught a class on interviewing and beat reporting. And one of the most important elements of any interview, whether it's broadcast or print, is being able to connect with the subject, but also be willing to listen. And I know that for me, like when I first started interviewing, like I would have a list of questions, right? Like 10, 15 questions. I would follow along the questions, and it felt robotic, right? Because they could, elaborate on an answer, and then you just completely ignore it. Like they could say, well, I lost my job, I lost something. And then if you completely ignore that, you as the interviewer aren't doing the whole interview process justice. And I think that for interviewing any athlete or any subject, you got to be willing to listen and you got to be willing to connect. Now, it's easier said than done because it takes practice, it takes reps. I've done many of these interviews for my podcast. So from the first one to this one, I'm a lot different of an interviewer, but it is very important because I feel like sometimes you may know something about someone for a story before going into the interview, but the whole interview may change your angle or look on a particular story or topic. So always willing to be adaptable and willing to listen to the interview subject will just make you better as an interviewer.
Lucas, I think you have so many great points there. And, I can tell you from my experience, I had because I was really trying to establish myself in the tennis world. Mm-hmm. So at the Rogers Cup, I had a sit-down interview with John Isner for a feature I was writing, which was cool as a young journalist. But listening to the transcript, he told me something about his relationship with I'd ask about his family. He told me something about his relationship with a couple of his brothers. And, I just went on to the next question and listening to the audio of the interview, I was frustrated. I was like, that would have been a great opportunity to ask more and elaborate on that. And I think that's so important. I think that as you get more reps, it's something you get better on. And I think your points about being adaptable is so important as well. For Shane Corson, for example, I spoke to him about his dad, but my rationale was to kind of, a big part of my story was in my mind was to see if head injuries, all the concussions he's had, and, did that impact him? Did that impact his mental health? But he didn't really want to go down that route too much, but he was more willing to speak about his father. So obviously, I adapted, and he really opened up about his dad. And I mean, same with when I spoke to George Larocque a couple months ago. He told me that, all his issues with his father, and mentally the struggle of being a fighter, and how he needed counseling for a couple of years after his NHL career concluded. And I didn't know that. I'm not sure if I was the first reporter he told that, but obviously when he tells me something like that, that's going to become a bigger focus of the story, and you have to adjust the interview. So, sorry, to conclude, I think your points about just not having you have an idea, but be able to go with the flow and be adaptable and listen is so important for a journalist in an interview.
So you go to Centennial College's graduate sports journalism program. Did it feel strange a little bit to be in a class, because given that you were, 5 years as a personal injury lawyer, and then now going into this field where I'm sure you were surrounded by, people that have, maybe covered sports already, reported, have, dabbled in certain, elements of journalism before going to the program?
In terms of being older, or in terms of maybe having less experience?
Yeah, like for example, for me, I'm in a class right now where it's mainly like a younger class, like people my age, people that have either just finished undergrad, may have taken a year off to sort of dabble in sports. But for you, you had done one career and are now doing another career. So I'm just curious about what that was like for you, being in a class with potentially younger people as someone with a little bit more experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was, people are people. That sounds like something Tommy Wiseau would say. People are people. But no, it was all right. I mean, I think the Florida trip was, that might have been the highlight, because I feel like people really bonded. People really bonded there. And, I was 32 at the time. There's no reason a 32-year-old can't be friends with 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds. Man, these are, as I'm saying these are not the most intelligent points, but yeah, I mean, I think maybe at times just being a bit older, but I mean, I was lucky. I had Bobby Colorado. He was 30. He was only 2 years younger than me. Sorry, Bobby. So nice to have someone close to my age. And there were people who were in their late 20s. So it was all right. I mean, it was a good chemistry, and I think I tried not to overanalyze the age gap. I mean, it is what it is.
No, I mean, good for you. I mean, that's someone that's not bothered by those factors. And again, it doesn't really just shows you, I think, the power of the program, that you could have people that are younger who go into the program and have success, but then you have relatively more experienced people that could go into the program and also have success as well. So it can definitely appeal to both ends of the age spectrum.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there are people early 30s that have done the program in the past. So I mean, it was okay.
No, for sure.
It's okay.
What was the biggest skill that you learned while you were at Centennial that has helped you in your journalism career?
I mean, I think, I enjoyed like people like John Chidley Hill and Shai Davidi. I think obviously I've done more writing, so anything writing based. I mean, I remember talking to Shai Davidi, and I'm an obsessed Raptors fan, right? Like I've been an obsessed Raptors fan my entire life. And I remember speaking to him, and, for me to write a Raptors piece, I mean, it might be easier for me there's so many people do that. It might be easier to he kind of suggested, find a different angle, take a different path. Right. And I've tried to write features dealing with mental health, find unique stories, and maybe more of a name for myself in that way. And so I think that was good advice from him. And maybe I'm I'm an obsessed Raptors guy, but maybe I was a bit intimidated, right? There's so many great Raptors people writing articles, and so I wasn't sure that writing basketball related articles, even though I've written some, was necessarily the best route to establish myself in the industry.
Yeah, and like I think finding the unique angle there is the really good point, because so often people chase the simple game story, or chase the obvious narrative, whether it's from last year, the Raptors winning the championship. It might be about Kawhi Leonard, right? Winning his second championship. But there's so many stories from last year's championship. I mean, maybe Serge Ibaka's a really good story, or Masai Ujiri, or Chris Boucher on the bench. I mean, something like that, that isn't so obvious. It can be a really unique story. And I think that a lot of outlets now, especially with limited budgets for freelance or to give to their writers, I understand that there's a need to get more traffic and get more clicks, given the click nature environment that we're in. And the big names certainly drive that, like a Kyle Lowry or an Austin Matthews, etc. But I just think that there is an audience out there that likes those off the beat, unique angle stories. And whether it's for Sportsnet, whether it's for Sports Illustrated, whether it's for The Athletic, people will read that. And I think it just makes you better as a journalist. They're able to write those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that said, I mean, I'm still, if I write a story for a publication, I'm still trying to get a ton of clicks, right? Like I'm still trying to find a unique angle that might not be the biggest name, but I mean, if I write a story for The Athletic, I wanted to get them, I want to find a unique story that will get them subscribers that, might convince them that I'm worth hiring, right? Like, cause it is a business. And if I, for Sportsnet get clicks, or Athletic get clicks and subscribers, like that is still the goal, right? Like and I think at the same time there have been some stories in smaller Canadian athletes that I think would be great stories, but I haven't pursued them or pitched them as much, just because I even though it's a really unique story, I know it's not going to get the clicks it needs. So I mean the business aspect is important. So yeah, so I think just to add to your point, I think unique, like off the beat kind of story that will still do well and hopefully get my name out there is important. And I think my rationale too, if has been to find unique stories that recently retired athletes, just because I'd love to speak to DeMar DeRozan and have him tell me about his childhood in Compton and everything he saw and everything he witnessed and how that kind of impacted his mental health growing up. But I don't think that's going to happen, right? So,
yeah.
Maybe
need to wait a few years for that, Peter. Maybe need to wait a few years.
Maybe. But I think certain like George LaRock is retired. I know that he's generally willing to be more candid. So finding a retired big name athletes that I know is more willing to be candid during an interview, that has more time now, that might be more open. I mean, that's kind of been a strategy, right? Because I need to speak to someone that's really going to open up. So that's kind of been my rationale as well. But I'll be honest. Sometimes I do feel, okay, should I pursue more current athletes, right? Like maybe I'm not giving myself enough credit that I'll be able to speak to them and get them to be, as candid as I need them to be to write a good story.
I want to get into your freelancing, because you freelance for a lot of really high profile outlets, from The Athletic, which we've talked about, Sportsnet, CBC Sports, Vice, among others. And I know that freelancing, certainly for a lot of young writers right now, is often the gateway to a full-time position somewhere, given, if they allow full-time positions. But sometimes you have to stay in that freelance sort of mode for a few years in order to get the reps, in order to build your portfolio. When did you start to feel comfortable in the pitching process and the success rate of your pitches? Because I know that from personal experience, like, I know that for me, I was writing, but it took a long time in order for me to sort of feel comfortable in getting pitches to be successful and writing for some high profile outlets.
It's a great question. It's very tough, and you're gonna either hear no or not hear anything back a hell of a lot more often than you're gonna hear yes. So one thing that's important, obviously, is to have some kind of relationship with the editor, if possible. And I mean, I think that's helped me. I think I mean, with The Athletic, for example, I think Caitlin McGrath, who's I know she was on your podcast. She's awesome. She sat down with me for coffee for like an hour and a half. Just of her own free time. And I think she liked some of my tennis stuff. So she'd, I think recommended me to Dan Robson, who's, incredible features writer, has written best-selling books. Mm-hmm. And I was able to meet him for coffee and, start pitching stuff towards him. And I think one thing leads to another. I think what helped me was, I sent him some pitches, and he's awesome, but I hadn't been able to get a story on The Athletic. But I even before I pitched it, I did the interview with Keon Clark. And I think I emailed Keon in 2018, didn't hear back. And then in 2019, last year, I messaged him in the morning. I didn't hear back. And then at like 6:30 p.m. before I was meeting a friend for dinner, he asked if I was free. And I just did the interview with Keon right then. And I wasn't, I'd written some questions down, but I wasn't totally prepared. But, if you heard the audio of the interview, there was a lot of jumping around. And I'm also trying to message my friend to, let him know I'm not going to make it, or I'm going to be late. But I think being the obsessed Raptors fan I was able to do a good interview. And then I was able to go to Dan and in terms of a pitch, say, I've spoken to Keon. He opened up to me about his mental health, his issues with alcohol, his time in prison, how he's, how he rehabilitated himself in prison, how he's doing now. And that's a much better pitch than let me write about Keon Clark, right? So he helped me get that story in The Athletic. And then having written, hopefully, what I thought was a decent story for The Athletic, I was able to get the Shane Corson story. And I think a combination of meeting people, which you've done a great job of doing through the podcast and perhaps outside, I don't know, but meeting people and also just impressing them with work. Mm-hmm. If you can meet someone and impress them with stories, there's a better chance that they will approve your pitch. It is tough, right? You have to be positive. You work really hard you work really hard in a pitch, and you either don't hear back or it gets rejected, right? It does take a toll on you mentally, but you just have to stay positive, take pride in just being productive, results or not, and just keep plugging away. But connections are good, and just, Adam Stanley said, I think, who taught a freelance class, he said, if they say no, I always say thank you for, I really appreciate your time. Hopefully we can work together in the future. Just be nice, right? Be likable. Try to meet with editors. It's do what you can. So.
No, for sure. Like, I think you make a lot of great points, and I think relationships in this industry is so critical, because I know that, certain writers may get pieces over other writers just because the editor has a relationship with them. They know what they are. And look, money is tight these days. Resources aren't abundant. So they want to give those resources to people that they can trust in order to do a really good job. And I know that for me, in my experience, I got my first story published on Sportsnet this year, and it was on a Canadian football player, Neville Gallimore, who got drafted to the NFL. And I know that, for me, like, I'd been trying to, submitting pitches to different people for about 1 to 2 years, like, just sort of, on and off, trying to follow up. And then, but finally, Jeff Lowe, who's an associate editor at Sportsnet, does the football stuff there, really liked my pitch idea for this football player that got drafted. And unfortunately, I couldn't get to speak to Neville, but I convinced Jeff, like, look, I can speak to his coaches. I can speak to a defensive coach that's, worked at all levels, who worked with Neville personally. I can speak with his high school coach here in Canada. And I think that sometimes, like, you obviously getting the subject is so important. And for your stories, like, we've talked about it off air. Like, I don't know if the Shane Corson story would run without Shane Corson's voice, but luckily at a place like Sportsnet, like, they would run the story without Neville Gallimore's voice, because I demonstrated I could go and get different sources that knew Neville and that could add that insight and perspective. So basically, a long story short, there are different ways to get freelance pitches, and I think building relationships will increase your chances to get a story on a big outlet, but not necessarily, because it just depends what they're looking for at a given time. And you have to throw paint to a wall a lot. Hopefully sometimes it sticks with a really good story.
Yeah, I absolutely. It's not easy, right? Like you said, and kudos to you for finding, despite not being able to speak to the main subject, speaking to other sources and getting the story on. So great work, Lucas, in terms of that. But it's not easy, right? There's not a ton of money for freelance at a lot of places. So, I mean, you may have to find your own way, write a blog, build. And I'll say this to other people. I think something I kind of regret, because I think I've written some nice pieces, but I haven't put a ton of effort into building a social media following. And, I kind of, certain people I worry, does that not look good? That I haven't really made a huge effort. I've made the effort to write good stories, but I haven't tried to build a Twitter following. When I spoke to someone at The Athletic, I think a rationale is, if you have a lot of followers, they can get subscribers by monetizing your followers. And my kind of rationale is, I've written stories that, even though I haven't tried to build a lot of followers, I've written a lot of stories that have, my recent one on Bernie Saunders, Sportsnet, and Tara Sloan and Steve Dangle, Jamie Campbell, and like a lot of people retweeted it. So if it's a good story, it'll get retweeted, it'll get good numbers, right? Even if I don't have a lot of followers. So I mean, that doesn't worry me too much, but I do worry in terms of getting hired, or in terms of the way it looks, that I haven't made the effort to get a lot of followers. So I think that is important. So, so young journalists, like, it does matter, I think. So, so it is good to build your social media channels.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always very torn with social media, to be honest with you, Peter, because I know that, like, it is a requirement. And while, like, I am, getting to a level that, and cultivating a follower, like, I know I could probably be better, but, like, I don't know, like, it's so hit and miss, social media, as you know. Like there's so many good accounts that I follow that, like, are like, how are you only, like, this number? Like, you deserve to be a lot higher, compared to some others where it's like, they have a lot of followers, but it's just like weird stuff that they're tweeting, right? So I feel like in time, like, I know, like, a lot of the Sportsnet personalities, like a Shai Davidi, for example, the reason why, like, they have the followers is because, like, they're doing a really good job. Like, they've been in the business for a while. They've established that credibility, and they're not there to, like, be unprofessional. And sometimes I feel like there's, like, a disconnect sometimes, like, the amount of followers that you have, what are you adding to the conversation, right? And if you're just sort of, and look, like, there's different accounts that have different purposes, and I'm not trying to criticize different people. Like, if that's your brand, you go for it. It's a free world. I'm just saying, like, sometimes be careful, because you may have a lot of followers, but, like, if you're just, like, tweeting a lot of, like, weird stuff, it may not fly well with employers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much it matters, like, the numbers you have. Hopefully in terms of getting hired, hopefully for me, it's not so integral. I mean, I thought, but who knows, right? I remember being at the Rogers Cup, and I was doing features on Sam Querrey and John Isner. I had one-on-one interviews with them, and so, someone in the media room kind of looked at my follower count and remarked about it. And like, to me, like, it's outside of it being, obviously it was a rude thing for him to do, but like I haven't, I've tried to write good stories. I haven't really tried to build my following in that sense. But maybe like, if he's making comment like that, it does matter. But I mean, I've seen journalists, outstanding journalists with different publications that don't have big numbers. So, I mean, hopefully it doesn't matter too much, but I mean, it is probably something I should try to increase, just because, maybe it's, if anyone, I'm really proud of some of the stories I've written, but if someone's going to look at my follower number and make a judgment of me based on that, then maybe it is something I should work on. Just for fellow young journalists out there, maybe it is something that is relevant.
No, of course. Always be willing to grow and improve your craft. I think that's so important. Final couple questions for you, Peter. Really appreciate you having you on today. How, I mean, for some, young journalists, young writers who are listening to this show and are trying to sort of figure out the whole, mastering freelance. We've obviously talked about, the need for relationships and handling the word no a lot. But once you sort of get the hang of it and like you're starting to get pitches and stories out there, how do you sort of know when to transition between like just writing every so often to making freelancing an actual career? And do you have any advice on how to like manage being a freelancer, like just in terms of like how many stories you have on the go and different tips and tools that you use to sort of manage what you're writing and what you're putting out there?
I mean, I think in terms of making freelancing a career, I know that Adam Stanley, I think he gave a great freelance class at Centennial, and I think he's been successful in making it a career. And people have been able to make a career out of it. I'm doing some legal document review on the side just because the freelance money, to be frank, isn't quite enough. So I think it's difficult to make a career out of it. I'm not saying it can't be done. But I mean, listen, a dream would be to be a feature writer at a publication. So if I can, and I'm trying to write as many, nice stories in my mind that make an impact, that do well analytically to get my name out there. So, I mean, in terms of making money from freelance, I mean, listen, there are some publications that pay more. I mean, I think the biggest tips are to be kind, write good pitches, write good succinct pitches that aren't too long, that, just think if you own Sportsnet or whatever the publication is, if you read it, is this something that would reach out to you? Is this unique? Because, any site is going to prefer to go with their stuff. So this has to be something that really sticks out to them, is really powerful. And maybe you've already have the interview, right? Like maybe you already have great quotes from someone unique that will make a great story, right? That's important. But just be persistent, take pride in sending each individual pitch, because if you get too emotional with rejection or not hearing back, it'll weigh on you too much. So write a couple pitches and be proud of the fact you sent 2 pitches, whatever the result is, and make connections with editors, right? Make connections with editors, write good pitches. Sometimes you can reach out to athletes and they'll give you an interview before the story is going to be, been agreed to be published, and that will increase the efficiency of your pitch already having the interview. So I think I'm kind of rambling. I don't, but hopefully somewhere in there are a few good tips for young journalists.
And finally, I know that you write a lot of really great features, and I'm just curious for you, what is 1 or 2 things that a young writer should consider in writing a really good feature?
It's a very good question. I'm not sure about one or two things, but I mean, you have to do a good interview and get good quotes, right? You have to do a lot of research on someone. Maybe there's one of the stories where it would have been really interesting if, you know, the athlete elaborated on something that he didn't. Maybe you can ask that. Maybe you can get him to elaborate on that subject matter. But I mean, I think the interview is so important, and getting really good quotes where ideally the athlete opens up about something in his life is important. And for me, I know once I have the good quotes, you know, my first draft isn't always great, but I'm confident in my ability to rewrite and make it flow well and have good rhythm. But I think the biggest thing is, you know, practice your interviewing skills, get a good interview, because if you have the quotes, then you have Keon Clark saying, you know, something like, man, I was smoking cigarettes at halftime. Who does that shit as a professional athlete? You know, if you have funny quotes like or powerful, you know, emotional quotes, whatever it may be, then you should be able to find a way to make it an engaging story. So I think my biggest tip is do your research before the interview. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions, not right away. Let them get in the flow of the interview. But you want to be unique. You can't just ask standard questions. You have to get them to open up. And the more research you've done will come across the athlete, and he'll respect your knowledge of him or her. And he or she will then likely be willing to be more candid and be more open, especially if you ask, you know, a tough question.
Peter Mendelsohn, he is a freelance sports journalist. You can find his work at The Athletic, Sportsnet, CBC Sports, among other places. He's also a graduate of Centennial College's graduate sports journalism program. Peter, thank you so much for joining me today on the Weesesports Chronicles.
Lucas, you're doing great work. Keep it up. And it was awesome to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to continue to follow your podcast. All the best, man.